The champagne glass trembled in Victoria Hartwell's hand as she watched her son-in-law James raise his glass at the head table. Something in his eyes, a glint of malice she had seen before, but convinced herself was imagination, made her blood run cold. The grand ballroom of the Westfield Hotel fell silent as the crowd of 200 guests turned their attention to the handsome young man standing beside her daughter. Victoria felt it then, the moment when everything would change. "I want to make a special toast tonight," James announced, his voice carrying through the elegant space adorned with crystal chandeliers and white roses for Catherine and James's first anniversary celebration. "To my beautiful wife, Catherine." Kate smiled, though Victoria noticed the slight tension in her daughter's shoulders. After 28 years of raising her, Victoria could read her daughter's body language like a book. Something was wrong. "1 year ago today, I married into the prestigious Hartwell family," James continued, his charm on full display. "A family known for their empire, their wealth, their connections." He paused, and Victoria felt a chill race down her spine. "But what most of you don't know is the fascinating story of my wife's background." Victoria glanced at Kate, whose smile had frozen in place. Their eyes met briefly, a silent communication passing between mother and daughter that spoke volumes. "You see," James's voice dropped conspiratorially, "behind every great fortune is a secret, and the Hartwells have theirs." He laughed, that practiced laugh that had always set Victoria's teeth on edge. "My wife, the elegant, educated Catherine Hartwell, isn't quite who you all think she is." The room grew uncomfortably quiet. Victoria could hear her own heartbeat thundering in her ears. "I'd like to propose a toast." James raised his glass higher, his eyes now fixed directly on Victoria, challenge written across his features, "to the maid's daughter." A collective gasp rippled through the crowd. James pointed at Catherine, laughing as if he'd delivered the punchline to an excellent joke. "That's right. The great Victoria Hartwell wasn't always the queen of real estate she is today. She was scrubbing floors when she caught Maxwell Hartwell's eye. And now here we are, pretending to be royalty." Victoria saw the flash of hurt cross her daughter's face, followed quickly by something else, determination. For a moment, Victoria was transported back 20 years, seeing herself in her daughter's eyes. The same resolve she had found within herself the day Maxwell died, when she discovered the betrayal that had killed him. The room buzzed with whispers. Victoria set her champagne flute down with deliberate slowness. 2 years of suspicion, 14 months of investigation, and 1 year of careful planning had led to this moment. She had hoped it wouldn't come to this, that James would have a shred of decency buried somewhere within him. But as she rose from her seat, she felt oddly calm. The time for pretense was over. "You know, James," Victoria said, her voice clear and strong despite the rage building inside her, "you're partially right. I did start with nothing." The room fell silent again. All eyes turned to Victoria Hartwell, resplendent in a tailored ivory suit, her blonde hair framing her face in elegant waves, pearl earrings catching the light as she moved. At 53, she carried herself with the confidence of a woman who had faced down devils and emerged victorious. "I was 18 when I started working as a housekeeper to put myself through community college," Victoria continued, her gaze steady on James's face. "I met Maxwell when I was working at his office building, not cleaning his home, as your employer Maxwell Richardson incorrectly informed you." James's smug smile faltered. Victoria could see the calculation behind his eyes, trying to determine how much she knew, how much was bluff. "I worked nights cleaning offices while studying business administration during the day. Maxwell noticed me because I had corrected an error in his financial projections that someone had carelessly left on a desk. He offered me an internship the next day." Victoria picked up her water glass. "So, yes, I worked as a cleaner. I've never hidden that fact. I'm proud of it." She paused, allowing her gaze to sweep across the room, making eye contact with several of the journalists she had specifically invited tonight. "What I find interesting, James, is that while you're so concerned with my humble beginnings, you've been less forthcoming about your own employment situation." Victoria smiled, the kind of smile that had made hardened business opponents squirm in their seats. "Did you really think I wouldn't investigate the man who so suddenly swept my daughter off her feet? Did you think I wouldn't recognize Maxwell Richardson's tactics when they destroyed my husband 18 years ago?" James's face drained of color. Catherine, next to him, straightened her shoulders and moved her chair slightly away from her husband's, a small gesture that did not go unnoticed by the watching crowd. "I'd like to propose a toast of my own," Victoria said, raising her glass, "to my unemployed son-in-law." She locked eyes with James. "You're fired." The words hung in the air. Several guests shifted uncomfortably in their seats. "For those of you wondering what I mean," Victoria continued, her voice carrying throughout the ballroom, "allow me to explain. James Caldwell has never worked for Hartwell Enterprises, despite what some of you might have been told. His actual employer is Richardson Capital, the company run by the man who defrauded my late husband out of millions, causing the heart attack that took him from us." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Victoria noticed several guests discreetly reaching for their phones, no doubt Googling the names she had just mentioned. "James was planted in my daughter's life," Victoria continued, her voice never wavering despite the emotion threatening to overwhelm her. "A calculated move by Richardson to infiltrate my company, gain access to proprietary information, and finish what he started nearly 2 decades ago, the complete destruction of everything Maxwell built." Catherine stood now, moving to stand beside her mother. The resemblance between them was striking. The same determined set of the jaw, the same straight spine. Catherine removed her wedding ring and placed it on the table with a soft clink that somehow echoed in the hushed room. "What James and his employer didn't count on," Catherine said, her voice clear despite the slight tremor Victoria could detect, "was that we discovered his true purpose within 2 months of our marriage." James stood abruptly, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. "Kate, what are you doing? This is insane!" "No, James," Catherine cut him off, her blue eyes cold. "What's insane is thinking you could use me to destroy my family. What's insane is believing we wouldn't fight back." Victoria placed a supportive hand on her daughter's shoulder, then addressed the stunned audience once more. "For the past year, my daughter has lived a nightmare, maintaining a facade of a happy marriage while we gathered evidence that has been turned over to the FBI, the SEC, and the district attorney's office." Victoria gestured toward the back of the room, where 3 men in dark suits stood watching impassively. "Representatives who, I believe, have some questions for you, James." James looked around wildly, like a cornered animal. "This is slander! You have nothing on me!" Victoria picked up a small remote from the table and pressed a button. The large screens around the ballroom, which had been displaying romantic photos of Catherine and James throughout the evening, now showed email exchanges, bank transfers, and surveillance photos. "Nothing?" Victoria arched an eyebrow. "We have everything, James. Every email, every phone call, every meeting with Richardson. We have the offshore accounts where you've been funneling the information you stole. We have the wire transfers proving you were paid to marry my daughter." One of the men from the back approached James. "Mr. Caldwell, I'm Special Agent Thomas with the FBI. We need you to come with us." James looked desperately at Catherine. "Kate, you can't believe this. I love you." "Save it," Catherine said quietly. "The only thing you love is money, and it cost you everything." "Auris?" As the agents escorted a protesting James from the ballroom, Victoria addressed her guests once more. "I apologize for the drama this evening. Those of you who came to celebrate a marriage are instead witnessing its end. But you're also witnessing something else: justice. Maxwell Richardson has spent 20 years destroying lives, manipulating markets, and corrupting officials. Today, that ends. Teeth. She nodded toward the screens, which now displayed Richardson's photo, alongside headlines detailing a massive investigation into corporate espionage, fraud, and corruption. Richardson Capital will be served with federal warrants tonight. By tomorrow morning, the man who destroyed my husband will finally face consequences for his actions. Victoria took a deep breath. For those of you who came simply to enjoy a party, please stay. The bar is open, the band will continue playing, and there is certainly cause for celebration. Victoria looked at her daughter, who stood tall despite the tears glistening in her eyes. Catherine had endured a year of living with a man she knew was using her, pretending affection she didn't feel, all to ensure justice would be served. Victoria had never been prouder. "And Catherine," Victoria said softly, though her microphone carried the words to every corner of the room, "your father would be so proud of you tonight." Eleanor Cooper, Victoria's executive assistant and closest friend, appeared at her side with 2 fresh champagne flutes. As Victoria took hers, she noticed Daniel Brooks, the company's chief legal counsel, making his way toward Catherine, concern evident in his expression. The room buzzed with conversation as guests tried to process what they had witnessed. Victoria sipped her champagne, the sweet taste of victory mixing with the bittersweet knowledge of what her daughter had endured. But as she watched Catherine accept the glass that Daniel offered her, saw the gentle way his hand brushed hers, Victoria allowed herself to hope. Perhaps from this pain, something genuine could grow. The past couldn't be changed. Maxwell was gone, his life cut short by betrayal. But tonight, Victoria had ensured that his legacy would endure, and perhaps, just perhaps, his daughter would find the happiness that had been denied to him. Victoria raised her glass one final time, not for the crowd, but for herself, for Maxwell, for the life they had built together, and the daughter who carried their strength within her. "To justice," she whispered. "Long overdue." The aftermath of the anniversary party swept through Boston's business community like wildfire. By morning, Victoria's phone wouldn't stop ringing. Journalists seeking exclusive interviews, business associates offering support, and even competitors expressing grudging admiration for the calculated precision with which she had executed her plan. But Victoria wasn't interested in the publicity. She sat in her home office, the early morning light streaming through floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the Charles River, reviewing the overnight reports from her security team. "Richardson was taken into custody at 3:15 this morning," Eleanor said, setting a cup of coffee on Victoria's desk. After 20 years as Victoria's right hand, Eleanor knew exactly how Victoria took her coffee. Strong, with just a touch of cream, no sugar. The FBI raided his offices and his home simultaneously. Victoria nodded, scanning the document before her. "And the offshore accounts?" "Frozen," Eleanor confirmed, taking a seat across from Victoria. "The SEC moved quickly. They've already identified over $30 million in stolen funds." She hesitated. "How's Catherine doing?" Victoria glanced toward the guest room where her daughter had spent the night. After the chaos of the previous evening, Catherine had been in no state to return to the penthouse she had shared with James. "She's strong," Victoria said quietly. "Stronger than I was at her age. But this past year," she shook her head. "Pretending to love someone who betrayed you, sleeping beside your enemy, it takes a toll." Eleanor reached across the desk and squeezed Victoria's hand. "She's your daughter. She'll bounce back." A soft knock at the door interrupted them. Catherine stood in the doorway, already dressed in a simple navy blue dress, her hair pulled back in a neat ponytail. Despite the carefully applied makeup, Victoria could see the shadows under her daughter's eyes. A year of deception and vigilance had left its mark. "The district attorney's office called," Catherine said, her voice steady despite everything. "They need me to come in and make a formal statement at 10. Victoria checked her watch. "I'll come with you." Catherine shook her head. "No, Mom. I need to do this alone." A faint smile touched her lips. "Besides, you have a company to run." The markets open in 30 minutes, and with Richardson Capital imploding, our investors will need reassurance. Pride swelled in Victoria's chest. Even now, in the midst of personal turmoil, Catherine was thinking like the executive she had been raised to be. Maxwell would indeed have been proud. Daniel called, Catherine added, a slight flush coloring her cheeks. He's meeting me at the DA's office. As our legal counsel, she added quickly. Victoria and Eleanor exchanged a knowing glance. Over the past year, as Catherine and Daniel had worked together to build the case against James and Richardson, Victoria had noticed the growing connection between them. The way Daniel looked at Catherine when he thought no one was watching, the way Catherine seemed to draw strength from his presence. It was nothing like the whirlwind romance James had orchestrated. This was something quieter, built on mutual respect and shared purpose. Give Daniel my regards, Victoria said neutrally, allowing her daughter the dignity of her private emotions. And Catherine, she paused, searching for the right words. What you did took extraordinary courage. Not many people could have maintained that deception for so long, even for the right reasons. Catherine's composure wavered for just a moment. I kept thinking about Dad, she said softly, about how Richardson destroyed him, how we found him that morning. Pete, she straightened her shoulders. I would have done it for another year if necessary. After Catherine left, Victoria turned her attention to the business at hand. As predicted, the news had sent shockwaves through the market. Richardson Capital's stock was in free fall, dragging down several associated companies. Meanwhile, Hartwell Enterprises held steady, the result of Victoria's careful preparation in the weeks leading up to the revelation. Victoria spent the morning in back-to-back calls with major investors, assuring them that not only was Hartwell Enterprises secure, but it was poised for growth now that Richardson's campaign of industrial espionage had been neutralized. By noon, their stock had risen 3 points, a vote of confidence from the market. Just as Victoria was preparing to break for lunch, her private line rang. The caller ID showed a number she hadn't seen in nearly 20 years. With a sense of grim satisfaction, she answered. Hello, Evelyn, Victoria said, keeping her voice cool and professional. Victoria? Evelyn Richardson's voice was tense, stripped of the social niceties that had once characterized their interactions when they had moved in the same circles, back when Maxwell and Maxwell Richardson had been partners. I assume you're satisfied now? Victoria leaned back in her chair, looking out at the city skyline. Satisfaction isn't the word I'd use, Evelyn. Justice, perhaps. My husband is sitting in a cell, Evelyn hissed. Our accounts are frozen. Our reputation is destroyed. All because of your vendetta. All because of your husband's actions, Victoria corrected. He destroyed mine. Or have you forgotten that? Have you forgotten how Maxwell trusted him implicitly? How your husband systematically drained their company, forged Maxwell's signature, mortgaged everything they'd built together? How Maxwell died of a heart attack the very morning he discovered the betrayal? The silence on the other end of the line stretched for several seconds. I didn't know, Evelyn finally said, her voice smaller now. Not at first. When I found out, Maxwell was already gone, and Max told me it was too late to turn back. It's never too late to do the right thing, Victoria said, thinking of her own journey from the cleaning staff to the boardroom, of the principles Maxwell had instilled in her. That's what I taught Catherine. That's what your husband should have taught your son. Thomas had nothing to do with this, Evelyn said quickly. I know, Victoria acknowledged. We investigated him thoroughly. Unlike his father, Thomas Richardson appears to run a legitimate business. She paused. You should talk to him, Evelyn. You're going to need support in the coming months. Another long silence. Why did you do it this way? Evelyn finally asked. Why the public humiliation? You could have gone to the authorities quietly. Victoria thought about the question carefully. The truth was complex, a mixture of justice, revenge, and strategy. Richardson hid behind his power and connections for 20 years, she finally said. He buried evidence, intimidated witnesses, bought influence. We needed the case to be too public, too visible for anyone to sweep under the rug. And yes, she admitted, I wanted him to feel what we felt. The public shame, the sudden fall, the helplessness. She heard Evelyn draw a shaky breath. Catherine is divorcing James immediately, I assume? The papers were filed at 9 this morning, Victoria confirmed. He really did love her, you know, Evelyn said. At least, I think he did, in the end. Max had something on him, forced him into the initial arrangement. But these past few months, James seemed different, conflicted. Victoria thought about the surveillance reports, the recorded conversations, the cold calculation in James's eyes even last night, as he had attempted to humiliate Catherine publicly. Love doesn't use people as pawns, Evelyn, she said firmly, and it certainly doesn't conspire to destroy their family. After ending the call, Victoria sat in silence for several minutes. The conversation had unsettled her more than she cared to admit. Not because of any doubt about what she had done, Richardson and James deserved every consequence coming to them, but because of the ripple effects of vengeance. Evelyn, like Catherine, was collateral damage in a war between men. The difference was that Catherine had chosen her role, while Evelyn had been blindsided. The intercom on Victoria's desk buzzed. Ms. Hartwell, her secretary's voice came through. Mr. Brooks is here to see you. Victoria frowned. Daniel should have been with Catherine at the district attorney's office. Send him in. Daniel Brooks entered, impeccably dressed as always in a charcoal suit, his dark hair neatly combed, his expression serious. At 35, he had already established himself as one of the top corporate attorneys in Boston, turning down more lucrative offers to remain with Hartwell Enterprises out of loyalty to the principles the company stood for. Daniel, Victoria greeted him, gesturing to a chair. I thought you were with Catherine. The interview finished early, Daniel explained, taking a seat. She's gone back to her apartment to pack some things. She asked me to update you. He placed a folder on Victoria's desk. The DA is moving forward with charges against both Richardson and James. The evidence is overwhelming. Victoria nodded, relieved but not surprised. And Catherine? She was... Daniel paused, searching for the right word. Remarkable. Detailed, composed, articulate. The prosecutors were impressed with her recall of specific conversations, dates, transactions. Pride swelled in Victoria's chest again. She always had her father's memory, Daniel smiled slightly, and her mother's spine. Victoria studied the young lawyer carefully. There was something different about him today, a nervous energy that seemed uncharacteristic for the normally unflappable attorney. Is there something else, Daniel? He met her gaze directly. I wanted to speak with you privately. About Catherine. Ah, so this was it. Victoria kept her expression neutral. Go on. Daniel leaned forward, his hands clasped in front of him. I understand this may seem inappropriate, given the timing. Catherine is just ending her marriage, and the circumstances are complex. But I want to be transparent with you. I appreciate transparency, Victoria said evenly. It's in short supply these days. Over the past year, while working with Catherine on building the case, I've developed feelings for her, Daniel said, his professional demeanor slipping just slightly to reveal the emotion beneath. I've been careful to maintain appropriate boundaries, given her situation. But now that the truth is out, you want my blessing to pursue my daughter. Victoria finished for him. Daniel nodded once. Yes, out of respect for you, for the company, and for what your family has been through. Victoria leaned back in her chair, considering. Daniel Brooks was everything James Caldwell had pretended to be. Intelligent, principled, genuinely devoted to the company's mission. More importantly, Victoria had seen how Catherine's face softened when he entered a room, how she seemed to draw strength from his steady presence. Catherine is a grown woman, Victoria said finally. She makes her own decisions about her personal life. Daniel nodded, accepting the gentle rebuff. However, Victoria continued, if she were to choose someone like you, someone who has proven his loyalty and integrity, she allowed a small smile. I would consider her judgment excellent. Relief washed over Daniel's face. Thank you, Ms. Hartwell. Victoria, she corrected him. I think we've moved beyond formalities, don't you? After Daniel left, Victoria turned back to the window, watching the city below. The first stages of their plan had succeeded beyond expectation. Richardson was in custody. James was facing charges, and the evidence they had gathered would ensure that justice was finally served. But Victoria knew from bitter experience that justice didn't heal all wounds. Catherine had a long road ahead, recovering from a year of deception, rebuilding her trust in others, learning to open her heart again. The phone on Victoria's desk rang again. This time, the direct line from her executive office downtown. Victoria, came the urgent voice of her CFO, Robert Campbell. You need to get down here. Thomas Richardson is in the lobby, demanding to see you. Victoria checked her watch. She had expected this confrontation, though perhaps not quite so soon. Tell security to escort him to the conference room, she instructed. I'll be there in 20 minutes. As Victoria gathered her things, she thought about what awaited her. Thomas Richardson, unlike his father, had built his technology company through innovation rather than deception. By all accounts, he was ethical, forward-thinking, and completely unaware of his father's criminal activities. How would he react to the destruction of his family's legacy? Would he seek revenge, continuing the cycle? Or would he prove to be the man his father was not? Only time would tell. But Victoria Hartwell had not survived and thrived in the cutthroat world of corporate America by being unprepared. Whatever came next, she would face it head-on, just as she had faced every challenge since that terrible morning when she had found Maxwell slumped over his desk. The evidence of his partner's betrayal spread before him. For Maxwell, for Catherine, for the empire they had built together, brick by painstaking brick. Victoria squared her shoulders and headed for the door. The past was finally being laid to rest. Now it was time to secure the future. The Hartwell Enterprises headquarters dominated the Boston skyline. 68 stories of gleaming glass and steel, a testament to Victoria's vision and determination. As her private elevator ascended to the executive floor, Victoria mentally prepared for her confrontation with Thomas Richardson. Unlike his father, Thomas had built his reputation on innovation and integrity. At 38, he had transformed a small tech startup into one of the most promising companies in the industry, deliberately distancing himself from his father's methods and connections. The elevator doors opened directly into the executive reception area, where Robert Campbell waited, his usually unflappable demeanor showing signs of strain. He's been waiting for 15 minutes, Robert said quietly, as he fell into step beside Victoria. Security did a thorough check. He's alone and unarmed. Victoria nodded. What's his demeanor? Controlled, Robert replied. But angry? Very angry. As he has every right to be, Victoria acknowledged. She paused outside the conference room door. Have legal standing by, but give us privacy unless I signal otherwise. Robert nodded and stepped back as Victoria entered the room. Thomas Richardson stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows, his back to the door, hands clasped behind him as he stared out at the city below. He turned at the sound of Victoria's entrance, and she was struck by how little he resembled his father. Where Maxwell Richardson had been florid and imposing, Thomas was lean and intense, with piercing dark eyes that now fixed on her with barely contained fury. Mrs. Hartwell, he said, his voice rigidly controlled. Ms., Victoria corrected mildly, setting her portfolio on the conference table. I reverted to my maiden name after Maxwell died. Please, sit. Thomas remained standing. I prefer not to. Victoria took a seat at the head of the table, outwardly calm despite the tension crackling in the air. As you wish. My father was arrested in the middle of the night, Thomas said without preamble. My mother called me in hysterics. Our family home was raided by federal agents. Richardson Capital's assets are frozen, and the business press is reporting that it was all orchestrated by you. His jaw tightened. A personal vendetta. 20 years in the making. Not a vendetta, Mr. Richardson, Victoria corrected. Justice. There's a difference. Is there? Thomas took a step closer, his controlled facade slipping slightly. You destroyed my family overnight. Your father destroyed mine 2 decades ago, Victoria replied, her voice steady despite the old pain that rose within her. He systematically defrauded his business partner, my husband, of millions. He forged signatures, manipulated accounts, and when Maxwell discovered the truth, the shock triggered a fatal heart attack. She met Thomas's gaze directly. I found my husband dead at his desk at 45 years old, with the evidence of your father's betrayal spread before him. Thomas faltered slightly, uncertainty crossing his features. That's not the story I was told. I'm sure it wasn't, Victoria acknowledged. Your father has spent 20 years rewriting history, burying evidence, silencing witnesses. He's told so many lies, he may even believe them himself now. Thomas ran a hand through his dark hair, a gesture of frustration. You could have pursued this through proper channels. Legal action, criminal complaints. I tried, Victoria said simply. For 2 years after Maxwell's death, I filed complaints, hired attorneys, gathered what evidence I could. But your father's influence was too extensive, his legal team too powerful, and I was a grieving widow with a 10-year-old daughter to raise and a company on the verge of collapse. She opened her portfolio and slid a document across the table toward Thomas. This is a copy of the criminal complaint I filed in 2007. It was dismissed for insufficient evidence. The investigating officer who recommended dismissal later joined your father's security team at triple his police salary. Thomas picked up the document, his expression troubled as he scanned it. I have 11 more examples like that, Victoria continued. Witnesses who suddenly changed their testimony. Judges who recused themselves after private meetings with your father. Evidence that mysteriously disappeared from police lockup. She paused. Your father didn't just commit fraud, Mr. Richardson. He corrupted the very systems designed to hold men like him accountable. Thomas set the document down, visibly shaken. So you orchestrated this elaborate trap, using my cousin James, using your own daughter. Catherine made her own choice, Victoria said firmly. When we discovered James's true purpose in pursuing her, she could have walked away. Instead, she chose to fight back, to see justice done for her father. Thomas paced the length of the conference room, processing everything he'd heard. Victoria watched him carefully, trying to gauge his reaction. Unlike his father, Thomas had a reputation for fairness, but he was still Richardson's son, and family loyalty ran deep. Why now? Thomas finally asked. After all these years? Victoria considered her answer carefully. The truth was complicated, a confluence of opportunity, timing, and a daughter's determination. James approached Catherine too aggressively, she said finally. He made mistakes, left traces of his connection to your father. Once we began investigating, we found the threads of a much larger conspiracy. She paused. Your father hasn't changed his methods, Mr. Richardson, only his targets. Thomas turned back to face her. What do you mean? Victoria pressed a button on the conference table, and the wall screen illuminated with financial charts, emails, and transaction records. Over the past 5 years, your father has been systematically targeting tech startups that compete with Richardson Technologies, your company. Victoria stood and approached the screen. He identifies promising companies, infiltrates them through planted employees or compromised executives, extracts their intellectual property, and then orchestrates their financial collapse. Thomas stared at the screen, the color draining from his face. These companies, I acquired 3 of them after they failed. Yes, Victoria nodded. You acquired their assets at pennies on the dollar, believing they had simply mismanaged their businesses or failed to execute their vision. In reality, they were sabotaged from within, their innovations stolen, then gifted to you wrapped in bankruptcy proceedings." Thomas sank into a chair, the implications hitting him full force. "I didn't know," he whispered. "I believe you," Victoria said, and she meant it. Everything in their investigation had suggested Thomas Richardson was his own man, building his company through genuine innovation rather than his father's underhanded tactics, which is why I wanted to speak with you privately, before this aspect of the investigation becomes public." Thomas looked up sharply. "Public? The FBI isn't just investigating your father's actions against Hartwell Enterprises," Victoria explained. "They're examining the pattern of corporate espionage and sabotage that has characterized his business dealings for decades, including his efforts to help your company succeed." Thomas closed his eyes briefly, understanding washing over his features. When he opened them again, Victoria saw something she recognized, the same devastation she had felt upon discovering Maxwell's betrayal. The foundation of Thomas's success, his pride in his accomplishments, was crumbling beneath him. "My company's reputation will be destroyed," he said quietly. "Everything I've built?" "Not necessarily," Victoria said, returning to her seat. "Your father was careful to insulate you from his activities. Our investigation found no evidence that you were aware of or involved in his methods." Hope flickered briefly in Thomas's eyes, quickly replaced by suspicion. "Why would you tell me this? Why warn me?" Victoria considered the young man before her. Despite being Maxwell Richardson's son, Thomas had carved his own path, built his own legacy, and now, like Catherine, he was collateral damage in a war he hadn't started. "Because continuing the cycle of destruction serves no one," she said simply. "Your father hurt my family. Using that pain to hurt you, when you've done nothing wrong, would make me no better than him." Thomas studied her for a long moment, as if seeing her clearly for the first time. "What do you propose?" "Transparency," Victoria replied. "Work with the investigators. Open your books completely. If your company has benefited from stolen intellectual property, make it right. Compensate the original developers. Credit the true innovators." "That could cost millions," Thomas pointed out. "It will," Victoria agreed. "But your company will survive with its integrity intact. And in the long run, that's worth more than any technology or market advantage." Thomas fell silent, weighing his options. Victoria didn't press him. This decision had to be his own. "My father always spoke of you with such hatred," he finally said. "He called you an opportunist who had married into wealth, a nobody who got lucky." Victoria smiled faintly. "And yet, here I sit, in the house that Maxwell and I built together, while your father faces the consequences of his actions." "He said Maxwell was weak," Thomas continued, a note of uncertainty in his voice, "that he couldn't make the hard decisions necessary in business. Maxwell believed that success achieved through deception wasn't success at all," Victoria said softly. "He believed in building something that would last, something he could be proud of." She paused. "I think, perhaps, you take after him more than your father." Thomas looked startled by the comparison, then thoughtful. After a long moment, he stood and extended his hand across the table. "I'll cooperate with the investigation," he said firmly. "Whatever my father has done, whatever advantage my company has gained through his methods, I want no part of it." Victoria rose and shook his hand, feeling the weight of 2 decades of bitterness begin to lift. "A wise decision, Mr. Richardson." "Thomas," he corrected. "I think we're beyond formalities now." After Thomas left, Victoria remained in the conference room, staring out at the city, where she and Maxwell had once dreamed of building their future. So much had changed since those early days. The naive young woman who had fallen in love with her kind-hearted boss was gone, replaced by a woman tempered by loss and hardened by necessity. The door opened behind her, and Victoria turned to find Catherine entering, her expression somber. "Daniel told me Thomas Richardson was here," Catherine said, joining her mother at the window. "How did it go?" "Better than expected," Victoria replied. "He knew nothing of his father's activities, He's agreed to cooperate with the investigation. Catherine nodded, relief evident in her posture. That's good. We never found any evidence linking him to James's operation. They stood in companionable silence for a moment, mother and daughter united by shared purpose and shared pain. The DA says they'll seek the maximum sentence for James, Catherine said finally, her voice steady despite the emotion Victoria knew she must be feeling. Wire fraud, corporate espionage, conspiracy. Are you all right? Victoria asked gently. Catherine considered the question carefully. Not yet, she admitted. But I will be. She turned to face her mother. I've been thinking about what comes next. For me, for the company. And, Victoria prompted, I want to establish a foundation, Catherine said, unexpected passion entering her voice. Using part of the settlement we'll eventually receive from Richardson Capital, a foundation focused on corporate ethics and fraud prevention, helping victims of white-collar crime rebuild their lives. Victoria felt a surge of pride. Even after everything Catherine had endured, her instinct was to create something positive from the experience. Your father would approve, Victoria said softly. Catherine smiled, a genuine smile that reached her eyes for the first time in months. I think so too. As they left the conference room together, Victoria's phone buzzed with a text message from Eleanor. James requesting meeting. Says he has information to trade. FBI approved with conditions. Victoria showed the message to Catherine, whose expression hardened. What do you think he wants? Catherine asked. Leniency, most likely, Victoria replied. He's facing serious charges. If he has information on other crimes Richardson has committed, he might try to use it as leverage. Catherine considered this for a moment. I don't want to see him, she said finally. But I think you should. Find out what he knows. Victoria nodded, understanding her daughter's reluctance. The wounds James had inflicted were still raw. I'll handle it. Later that afternoon, Victoria sat in an austere room at the Federal Detention Center, waiting for James to be brought in. The irony wasn't lost on her. James had spent a year infiltrating her family, living in her daughter's home, all to destroy Victoria. Now he was the one behind bars, while she remained free to determine his fate. The door opened and James entered, escorted by a guard. Gone were the expensive suit and confident swagger. In prison-issued clothing, without his carefully styled hair and practiced charm, he looked younger, almost vulnerable. The guard directed him to the seat across from Victoria, then retreated to the corner of the room. Victoria, James greeted her, his voice subdued. James, she replied coolly. He leaned forward, keeping his voice low. I'm sure you're enjoying this. I take no pleasure in seeing anyone's life destroyed, Victoria said truthfully. Even yours. James laughed bitterly. Always the picture of moral superiority. I was told you have information to trade, Victoria said, ignoring the jab. I suggest you get to the point. My time is valuable. James studied her for a moment, calculation evident in his eyes, despite his diminished circumstances. Richardson's operation goes beyond what you've uncovered, beyond corporate espionage. I'm listening, Victoria said, maintaining her composure despite her interest. He has connections to city officials, zoning commissioners, building inspectors, James continued. He's been manipulating property values, steering development contracts to companies he secretly controls. Victoria kept her expression neutral, though internally her mind was racing. If true, this would explain how Richardson had managed to block several of Hartwell Enterprises' development projects over the years. That's hardly surprising, she said dismissively, not wanting to reveal her interest. Richardson has always used his influence. This is different, James insisted. We're talking systematic corruption, millions in bribes, projects approved that violate safety codes, others blocked despite meeting every requirement. He leaned closer. I have names, dates, account numbers, evidence that would interest the FBI and the district attorney very much. And what do you want in exchange for this information? Victoria asked, though she already knew the answer. "Your support for a reduced sentence," James said immediately. "A recommendation to the prosecutors that I cooperated fully." Victoria considered him carefully. The James Caldwell before her was a far cry from the confident young man who had charmed his way into her daughter's life. But beneath the disheveled appearance and desperate circumstances, she could still see the calculation in his eyes. "You betrayed my daughter in the most personal way possible," Victoria said evenly. "You married her under false pretenses. You shared her home, her bed, her life, all while plotting to destroy her family." James had the grace to look away, though whether from shame or simply inability to maintain her gaze, Victoria couldn't tell. "Catherine is divorcing me," he said quietly. "My career is over. My reputation is destroyed. Isn't that punishment enough?" "That's not for me to decide," Victoria replied, "but I'll tell you what I can do. Provide your information to the authorities. If it proves valuable, I won't oppose any deal they offer you." She paused. "But I won't advocate for you either." James considered this, clearly disappointed, but recognizing it was the best offer he would get. "Fine. One more thing," Victoria added. "I want to know the truth. Did you ever have genuine feelings for Catherine? Or was it all an act from the beginning?" James looked surprised by the question. He hesitated, and for a moment, Victoria saw conflict in his expression. "It wasn't supposed to get so complicated," he finally said. "I was hired to get close to her, to gain access to Hartwell Enterprises through her. The marriage, that was Richardson's idea. He thought it would give me legal rights, make it harder for you to shut me out." "That doesn't answer my question," Victoria pressed. James met her gaze directly for the first time. "I admired her," he admitted. "Her intelligence, her strength. Sometimes, when I would forget why I was there." He trailed off. "It doesn't matter now." Victoria stood, gathering her belongings. "No," she agreed. "It doesn't." As she turned to leave, James called after her. "Victoria." She paused, but didn't turn around. "For what it's worth, I'm sorry. Not for taking Richardson's money. I needed it at the time. But for hurting Catherine. She deserved better." Victoria looked back at him one last time. "Yes," she said simply. She did. As Victoria left the detention center, the late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the parking lot. She found Daniel waiting by her car, his expression concerned. "How did it go?" he asked as she approached. "About as expected," Victoria replied. "He has information on Richardson's corruption of local officials. It may prove useful." Daniel nodded. "Catherine's at the office, reviewing the foundation proposal with the legal team. She wanted me to tell you she's staying at her apartment tonight." Victoria raised an eyebrow. "Is she ready for that? The penthouse must be full of memories." "She's having everything of James's removed," Daniel explained. "She said she needs to reclaim her space, start fresh." He hesitated. "I offered to stay in the guest room just so she wouldn't be alone. She said she'd think about it." Victoria studied the young lawyer thoughtfully. His concern for Catherine was evident, but so was his respect for her independence, her need to heal on her own terms. "Give her time, Daniel," Victoria advised gently. "Catherine has spent a year living a lie. She needs to rediscover who she is, what she wants, before she can move forward." Daniel nodded, understanding in his eyes. "I know. I just want her to know she's not alone." As Victoria drove home that evening, the city lights beginning to twinkle in the gathering dusk, she reflected on the day's events. Thomas Richardson, choosing integrity over family loyalty. James, facing the consequences of his choices. Catherine, already looking beyond her pain to create something meaningful. And Victoria herself, after 20 years of carrying the weight of Maxwell's death, of rebuilding their company from the ashes while raising their daughter alone, of waiting patiently for the opportunity to bring his betrayer to justice. What came next for her? For the first time in 2 decades, Victoria Hartwell found herself without a driving mission. Justice had been served. Maxwell could rest in peace. Catherine was finding her own path forward. Perhaps, Victoria thought, As she turned her car toward home, it was finally time for her to do the same. 3 months after the night that had shattered James Caldwell's carefully constructed facade, the first signs of autumn tinged the Boston Common with gold and crimson. Victoria stood at the window of her office, watching the leaves dance on the breeze, a steaming cup of tea warming her hands. The past quarter had been a whirlwind of legal proceedings, media inquiries, and corporate restructuring as the full extent of Maxwell Richardson's crimes came to light. The knock at her door was gentle but deliberate, Eleanor's signature. "Come in," Victoria called, not turning from the window. "The final settlement agreement arrived," Eleanor said, placing a thick envelope on Victoria's desk. "The lawyers have reviewed it. Everything is as negotiated." Victoria nodded, finally turning to face her friend and confidant. "And Richardson pleaded guilty to all charges yesterday," Eleanor confirmed, her satisfaction evident, "in exchange for a reduced sentence, 20 years instead of 30. At his age, it's essentially a life sentence." Victoria absorbed this news with a complex mixture of emotions. After 2 decades of waiting, of planning, of never forgetting the sight of Maxwell slumped over his desk that terrible morning, justice had finally been served. Yet the victory felt hollow in some ways. Richardson's downfall couldn't bring Maxwell back, couldn't restore the years of grief and struggle. "The Richardson Technologies transition is complete," Eleanor continued, consulting her tablet. "Thomas has renamed the company Phoenix Innovations and publicly disclosed all the stolen intellectual property. The compensation fund for the affected startups is fully funded, and the first distributions begin next week." Victoria allowed herself a small smile. Thomas Richardson had surprised her with his integrity, his determination to make amends for his father's crimes, even at great personal cost. The young man had shouldered the burden of his family's disgrace with dignity, transforming a company built on deception into one committed to transparency and ethical innovation. "And Catherine's foundation?" Victoria asked, returning to her desk. Eleanor's expression softened. "The Hartwell Ethics Initiative received its formal nonprofit status approval yesterday. The board of directors meets next Tuesday for their inaugural session." Pride swelled in Victoria's chest. In the aftermath of personal betrayal, Catherine had channeled her pain into purpose, creating an organization dedicated to preventing others from suffering as her family had. The foundation would provide resources for victims of corporate fraud, fund research into better detection methods, and offer educational programs on business ethics for the next generation of leaders. "She's invited the CEOs of the companies Richardson targeted," Eleanor added. "Several have already agreed to serve on advisory committees." Victoria nodded, unsurprised by her daughter's foresight. Catherine had always possessed a gift for building connections, for seeing the potential in collaboration rather than competition, a quality she had inherited from Maxwell. "And James?" Victoria asked, keeping her voice neutral despite the complicated feelings the name still evoked. Eleanor consulted her tablet again. "Sentenced to 5 years, with possibility of parole after 3. His cooperation was substantial. The prosecutors credit his evidence with breaking open 3 additional corruption cases involving city officials." Victoria absorbed this information without comment. James Caldwell had made his choices, first in accepting Richardson's money to deceive Catherine, then in providing evidence against his employer when it served his interests. Whatever regrets he might harbor now couldn't erase the pain he had caused. "There's one more thing," Eleanor said, hesitating slightly. "Catherine called. She'd like you to join her for dinner tonight at her new place. She said to tell you it's important." Victoria raised an eyebrow. "Her new place?" Eleanor nodded. "She closed on the Beacon Hill townhouse last week. The renovations were completed faster than expected." After the divorce was finalized, Catherine had been adamant about selling the penthouse she had shared with James. "Too many memories," she had said. "Too much deception embedded in those walls." Instead, she had purchased a historic townhouse in Beacon Hill, a property that needed extensive renovation but possessed good bones, as Catherine had put it. a metaphor not lost on Victoria. "Did she say what this is about?" Victoria asked. Eleanor shook her head. "Just that it's important, and that Daniel will be there too." Victoria felt a flutter of intuition. Over the past months, as they had worked side by side to untangle the legal complexities of Richardson's crimes, Catherine and Daniel's relationship had evolved from professional respect to something deeper. Victoria had watched it unfold with quiet approval, never interfering, but noting the gradual transformation in her daughter, the return of her genuine smile, the spark rekindling in her eyes. "I'll be there," Victoria assured Eleanor. "Now, let's review the quarterly projections before the board meeting tomorrow." As the afternoon progressed, Victoria found her thoughts repeatedly drifting to the coming evening. Catherine had always been independent, even as a child, determined to make her own decisions, forge her own path. Victoria had respected that independence, perhaps sometimes keeping too much distance in her effort to avoid the controlling parenting she herself had experienced. The intercom on Victoria's desk buzzed. "Ms. Hartwell, Mr. Thomas Richardson is here to see you. He doesn't have an appointment." Victoria frowned slightly. Though their interactions had been cordial over the past months, she and Thomas maintained a careful professional distance. "Send him in." Thomas entered, looking notably more relaxed than during their last encounter. Gone was the defensive anger, the shock of betrayal. Instead, he carried himself with the quiet confidence of a man who had faced a moral crucible and emerged stronger. "Victoria," he greeted her. "Thank you for seeing me without notice." "Thomas," she gestured to the chair across from her desk. "What brings you here?" He sat, placing a small wooden box on the desk between them. "I found this in my father's personal safe while clearing out his office. I believe it belongs to you." Victoria looked at the box with curiosity. It was old, the wood darkened with age, a simple brass clasp holding it closed. "Open it," Thomas encouraged. Victoria hesitated, then carefully lifted the lid. Inside, nestled on faded velvet, lay a pocket watch, gold, intricately engraved, attached to a delicate chain. Her breath caught in her throat as recognition dawned. "Maxwell's watch," she whispered, gently lifting it from the box. "I gave this to him on our 5th anniversary." She turned it over, running her thumb across the engraving on the back. "To Maxwell, for all our moments. Love, Victoria." "My father must have taken it," Thomas said quietly. After Maxwell's death. After Richardson had betrayed his partner, stolen from their company, and ultimately caused the heart attack that took Maxwell's life. Victoria felt a surge of anger, quickly followed by profound sadness. That Richardson would take this personal memento, this symbol of Maxwell and Victoria's love, seemed a final, petty cruelty. Why would he keep it? Victoria wondered aloud, not really expecting an answer. Thomas shook his head. "I don't know. Perhaps as some kind of trophy. Or maybe," he hesitated, "maybe as a reminder of what he'd done, what he'd lost." Victoria opened the watch. To her surprise, it still ticked steadily, keeping perfect time after all these years. Inside the cover was a small photograph, Victoria and Maxwell on their wedding day, young and radiant with hope for their future. "Thank you for returning this," Victoria said, her voice thick with emotion. "It means more than you know." Thomas nodded. "It was the right thing to do." He paused. "I've been thinking a lot about right and wrong these past months, about legacy and reputation. My father spent his life building wealth and power through any means necessary. In the end, what did it get him? A prison cell and a son who can barely speak his name without shame." Victoria closed the watch gently, holding it in her palm. "And yet you've chosen a different path." "I had a good example," Thomas said, a faint smile touching his lips. "Not from my father, but from what I've learned about Maxwell, about the company you built together, about doing business with integrity, even when it's difficult." Victoria studied the young man before her, seeing him truly for perhaps the first time. Not as Maxwell Richardson's son, not as an extension of the man who had betrayed her family, but as his own person, someone who had faced a terrible truth about his father and chosen to forge a different legacy. "Your father's actions don't define you, Thomas," Victoria said gently. "You've proven that these past months." Thomas nodded, a weight seeming to lift from his shoulders at her words. "I should go. I have a board meeting at 4. He stood, then hesitated. "There's one more thing. Phoenix Innovations is launching a scholarship program for underprivileged students interested in technology and business ethics. With your permission, I'd like to name it after Maxwell." Victoria felt something shift within her, a loosening of the grief and anger she had carried for so long. "I think he would be honored," she said softly. "As am I." After Thomas left, Victoria sat holding Maxwell's watch, memories washing over her like gentle waves. Their first meeting, when she had nervously corrected his financial projections while cleaning his office after hours. Their first date at a small Italian restaurant where Maxwell had spoken passionately about his dreams for the company. The day he had proposed, not with an extravagant gesture, but with quiet sincerity during a walk through the public garden. The birth of Catherine, Maxwell's face alight with wonder as he held their daughter for the first time. All these years, Victoria had focused on Richardson's betrayal, on seeking justice for what had been taken from them. But holding this tangible piece of her life with Maxwell reminded her of what could never be taken: the love they had shared, the daughter they had raised, the values they had instilled in her. The watch ticked steadily in her hand, marking the passage of time. Forward, always forward. That evening, Victoria arrived at Catherine's new townhouse precisely at 7, a bottle of champagne in hand. The brick facade had been meticulously restored, the black shutters and glossy front door lending the historic building a timeless elegance. As Victoria climbed the front steps, she noted the new brass knocker, a phoenix, wings spread in flight. Rebirth from the ashes. Catherine had always had a flair for meaningful symbolism. Before she could knock, the door swung open. Catherine stood in the entryway, dressed simply in a blue silk blouse and tailored trousers, her dark hair falling in soft waves around her shoulders. But it was her expression that caught Victoria's attention, a luminous happiness that Victoria hadn't seen in far too long. "Mom!" Catherine greeted her warmly, embracing Victoria with uncharacteristic exuberance. "You're right on time. Come in. Come in." Victoria followed her daughter into the home, admiring the transformation. The interior had been completely renovated, the original architectural details preserved and enhanced. Crown moldings, hardwood floors, marble fireplaces, while the furnishings were contemporary and minimalist. The effect was both respectful of history and thoroughly modern, much like Catherine herself. "The place looks wonderful," Victoria commented, handing Catherine the champagne. "You've done an amazing job with the renovation." "I had help," Catherine admitted with a smile. "Daniel has surprisingly good taste for a corporate lawyer." As if summoned by his name, Daniel appeared from what appeared to be the kitchen, wiping his hands on a dish towel. His usual formal attire had been replaced by dark jeans and a casual button-down shirt, and his expression as he looked at Catherine held such transparent affection that Victoria felt almost intrusive witnessing it. "Victoria," he greeted her warmly. "Dinner's almost ready. I hope you like risotto." "Daniel insisted on cooking," Catherine explained, leading Victoria into the elegant dining room where the table was already set for 3. "He claims his grandmother's risotto recipe is life-changing." "It is," Daniel asserted with mock seriousness. "Prepare to have your culinary worldview transformed." Victoria watched their easy banter with quiet satisfaction. This was what she had wanted for Catherine. Not just professional success or financial security, but genuine happiness. Someone who saw her strength and intelligence as assets to be admired rather than threats to be managed. Someone who supported her ambitions instead of trying to undermine them. As they settled at the table with plates of truly excellent risotto and glasses of the champagne Victoria had brought, the conversation flowed naturally. Updates on the Foundation's progress, the latest developments in the ongoing corruption investigations sparked by James's testimony, Catherine's plans for expanding the townhouse's tiny garden. It wasn't until they had finished the main course that Catherine set down her fork and exchanged a meaningful glance with Daniel. "Mom," she began, her voice taking on a more serious tone, "we asked you here tonight because we have something important to tell you." Victoria felt a flutter of anticipation. She had suspected this moment might be coming, had seen the signs in the way Catherine and Daniel gravitated toward each other, the way their professional partnership had deepened into something more personal. Daniel reached across the table, taking Catherine's hand in his. "Victoria," he said, his voice steady despite the nervous energy she could sense beneath his composed exterior, "I've asked Catherine to marry me." Catherine's face broke into a radiant smile. "And I've said yes." Despite having anticipated this announcement, Victoria felt momentarily speechless. After everything Catherine had endured with James, the betrayal, the public humiliation, the year spent living a lie, the fact that she had found the courage to trust again, to open her heart to the possibility of love, seemed nothing short of miraculous. "I know it seems fast," Catherine continued, misinterpreting Victoria's silence. "After everything with James, I understand if you have concerns." "No," Victoria interrupted gently, reaching out to cover their joined hands with her own. "No concerns, only joy for you both." She smiled, emotion making her voice slightly unsteady. "You deserve happiness, Catherine. And, Daniel," she turned to the man who would become her son-in-law, "I couldn't ask for a better partner for my daughter." Relief washed over Daniel's features. "Thank you, Victoria. Your blessing means everything to us." "We're planning a small ceremony," Catherine explained, her excitement evident now that Victoria's approval was assured. "Nothing elaborate, just family and close friends. In the spring, perhaps, when the garden is in bloom." Victoria nodded, understanding her daughter's desire for simplicity after the spectacle that had been her first wedding. "That sounds perfect." "There's one more thing," Catherine said, her expression turning slightly more serious. "The Foundation is taking off faster than we anticipated. The demands are already more than I can handle alone." She took a deep breath. "I'd like you to consider joining me as co-director, Mom. Your experience, your connections, they would be invaluable." Victoria blinked in surprise. Throughout her career, she had maintained a careful separation between her role as CEO of Hartwell Enterprises and her personal life. The company had been her focus, her purpose, the legacy she would leave to Catherine. The idea of stepping away, of pursuing something new alongside her daughter, had never occurred to her. "What about Hartwell Enterprises?" she asked. Catherine smiled. "You've built an incredible team. The company is stronger than it's ever been. And with the Richardson threat finally neutralized," she shrugged slightly, "maybe it's time to trust others to carry that torch forward, to focus on what comes next." Victoria felt a strange lightness at the suggestion, as if permission had been granted to lay down a burden she hadn't fully acknowledged carrying. For 20 years, Hartwell Enterprises had been her mission, her purpose, the vehicle through which she would secure justice for Maxwell and a future for Catherine. Now, with both those goals accomplished, perhaps it was time for a new chapter. "I'll consider it," she promised, and meant it. Later, as they shared dessert, a delicate lemon tart that Daniel admitted he had purchased rather than attempted to make, Catherine excused herself briefly to answer a phone call from the Foundation's legal team. Left alone with Daniel, Victoria took the opportunity to satisfy her curiosity. "May I ask when you knew," she inquired gently, "about Catherine? When you knew it was more than professional respect or friendship?" Daniel considered the question thoughtfully, a smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "During the preparation for the case against James," he said finally, "we were reviewing surveillance footage, hour after hour of mundane interactions, looking for evidence. It was tedious, draining work." He paused, lost in the memory. Catherine never complained, never wavered. She was watching the man she had married lie to her face, day after day, and still she maintained her composure, her focus. I remember thinking that her strength was the most beautiful thing I'd ever seen. Victoria nodded, understanding completely. It was the same quality that had drawn Maxwell to her all those years ago. Not just her intelligence or determination, but her resilience, her capacity to face adversity without being diminished by it. "And you?" Daniel asked. "When did you know you could trust me with her happiness?" The question caught Victoria off guard with its directness, its insight. She thought back over the past year, the gradual building of evidence against James and Richardson, the careful planning of their exposure, the aftermath of rebuilding what had been broken. "The night of the anniversary party," she said finally, "when everything fell apart. You weren't focused on the case or the legal implications or the media attention. You were focused on Catherine, making sure she was okay, giving her space when she needed it, staying close when she didn't. You saw her, not just the situation." Daniel nodded, clearly moved by her answer. "I promise you, Victoria, I will always see her. Always." When Catherine returned, apologizing for the interruption, the three of them moved to the cozy living room where a fire crackled in the restored fireplace. As Catherine and Daniel shared their preliminary wedding plans, Victoria found her hand drifting to her pocket, where Maxwell's watch now rested. So much had changed. So much had been lost and found again. The justice she had sought for 20 years had finally been achieved, but more importantly, the daughter she and Maxwell had raised was forging her own path forward, not defined by betrayal or revenge, but by purpose and love. As the evening drew to a close, Victoria stood on the front steps of the townhouse, embracing Catherine and then Daniel before departing. "I'm proud of you," she whispered to her daughter. "So proud. And your father would be too." Catherine smiled, her eyes bright with emotion in the soft glow of the porch light. "I know, Mom. I know." Walking to her car, Victoria glanced back at the townhouse, at Catherine and Daniel standing in the doorway, their silhouettes framed by the warm light behind them. A new beginning, a new chapter. And for Victoria herself, perhaps it was time to explore what else life might hold, beyond the mission that had driven her for so long. The thought was both terrifying and exhilarating, like standing at the edge of an unknown frontier, uncertain what lay ahead but eager to discover it. The watch ticked steadily in her pocket. Forward, always forward. The morning of Catherine and Daniel's wedding dawned with the gentle promise of early spring. Pale sunlight filtering through a canopy of cherry blossoms in the private garden behind Catherine's townhouse. Victoria stood at the window of the guest bedroom, watching as workers made final adjustments to the small arrangement of chairs, the flower-adorned pergola where the ceremony would take place, the string quartet setting up in the corner of the garden. 6 months had passed since Catherine and Daniel had announced their engagement. 6 months of remarkable transformation for the Hartwell women. Catherine had fully stepped into her role as founder and director of the Hartwell Ethics Initiative, which had already made significant impacts in corporate accountability education. Victoria, after careful consideration and extensive preparation, had appointed Robert Campbell as her successor at Hartwell Enterprises, transitioning to chairman of the board while joining Catherine at the foundation as co-director. The change had been rejuvenating in ways Victoria hadn't anticipated. After decades of focusing on the bottom line, on corporate strategy and market positioning, working directly with the victims of corporate fraud had reconnected her with the human impact of business decisions. The foundation had already assisted over 200 families affected by Richardson's schemes, providing not just financial support, but legal advocacy and emotional counseling. A soft knock at the door interrupted Victoria's thoughts. "Come in," she called, turning from the window. Eleanor entered, already dressed for the wedding in an elegant navy suit, her silver hair swept into a sophisticated updo. "The makeup artist is ready for you," she said. And Catherine's asking for you. Pre-wedding jitters, I think." Victoria nodded, following Eleanor down the hallway to the master bedroom that had been transformed into a bridal preparation area. The room was a flurry of activity. A stylist arranging the final touches on Catherine's hair, the wedding planner confirming details via phone, Catherine's two closest friends from university, admiring the simple but elegant wedding dress hanging on a decorative screen. In the midst of it all stood Catherine, wrapped in a silk robe, her expression a mixture of excitement and nervous tension. When she saw Victoria, relief washed over her features. "Mom," she said, crossing the room to embrace Victoria. "I'm so glad you're here." The makeup artist and hairstylist discreetly stepped back, giving them a moment of privacy. "Cold feet?" Victoria asked gently, recognizing the particular anxiety in her daughter's eyes. Catherine shook her head. "Not about Daniel. Never about Daniel." She hesitated. "It's just the last time I did this." Understanding dawned. The last time Catherine had prepared for a wedding, she had been marrying a man who saw her only as a means to an end, a tool in a plot to destroy her family. Even though she now knew her love for Daniel was genuine and reciprocated, the memory of that earlier deception cast a shadow over the day. Victoria took Catherine's hands in hers, meeting her daughter's troubled gaze directly. "This is nothing like last time," she said firmly. "You and Daniel found each other in the midst of chaos and betrayal. You've seen each other at your most vulnerable. There are no masks between you, no hidden agendas." Catherine's tension visibly eased at her mother's words. "You're right," she acknowledged. "I know you're right. It's just, you're allowed to be nervous," Victoria assured her. "Every bride is. But this," she gestured to the bustling room, the preparations for the day ahead. "This is real, Catherine. This is true." A smile bloomed across Catherine's face, transforming her anxiety into radiant joy. "It is, isn't it? After everything, after all the lies and manipulation, this is real." Victoria nodded, feeling her own emotions rise to the surface. "Your father would be so happy for you today," he said softly. "So proud of the woman you've become, of the choices you've made." At the mention of Maxwell, Catherine's eyes filled with tears. "I wish he could be here," she whispered, "to walk me down the aisle." "He is here," Victoria said firmly, reaching into the pocket of her robe to withdraw Maxwell's pocket watch. "In every way that matters." Catherine gasped softly at the sight of the watch. "Dad's watch! Where did you find it?" "Thomas Richardson returned it," Victoria explained, placing the watch in Catherine's hand. "His father had kept it all these years." Catherine ran her fingers over the engraving, her touch reverent. "For all our moments," she read aloud. "I thought," Victoria suggested gently, "that you might carry it today. Something old, something borrowed." Tears spilled down Catherine's cheeks as she nodded wordlessly, clutching the watch to her heart. One of her friends quickly stepped forward with a tissue, careful not to disturb the preparations for Catherine's makeup. "Now," Victoria said with a deliberate lightness, blinking back her own tears, "let's get you ready. You have a very good man waiting for you." The next 2 hours passed in a blur of activity. Hair and makeup completed, Catherine transformed into a vision in a simple but elegant ivory sheath dress. Victoria dressed in a pale blue suit that complemented her eyes and coloring. By the time the string quartet began playing the first delicate notes of Bach's Air on the G string, everything was ready. Victoria stood with Catherine in the small anteroom leading to the garden, making a final adjustment to her daughter's simple veil. "Perfect," she pronounced, stepping back to admire the effect. Catherine took a deep breath, her hand going to the small silk pouch attached to her bouquet, where Maxwell's watch rested. "I'm ready," she said, her voice steady and sure. Victoria offered her arm. "Then let's not keep Daniel waiting." Together, they stepped into the sunlit garden. Only 50 guests had been invited, close friends, trusted colleagues, a few family members. Victoria spotted Eleanor in the front row. Thomas Richardson standing respectfully at the back, Robert Campbell and his wife seated in the middle, and at the end of the aisle, beneath the pergola draped with white roses and cherry blossoms, stood Daniel, his expression transforming from nervous anticipation to awe as he caught sight of Catherine. As they reached the midpoint of the aisle, Victoria felt Catherine squeeze her arm gently. "Thank you," Catherine whispered, "for everything, for showing me what real strength looks like." Victoria's heart swelled with emotion as she placed Catherine's hand in Daniel's, then stepped aside to take her seat in the front row. The officiant, a dignified older woman who had been Maxwell's favorite professor at Harvard, began the ceremony with warm words about love tested by adversity, about partnerships built on mutual respect and shared values. As Catherine and Daniel exchanged vows they had written themselves, Victoria found her thoughts drifting to Maxwell, to their own wedding day nearly 30 years ago, to the life they had built together, to the daughter they had raised. In her mind's eye, she could almost see him sitting beside her, his eyes shining with pride and joy as he watched Catherine pledge her life to a man worthy of her. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," the officiant declared, her voice carrying clearly in the intimate garden setting. "You may kiss the bride." As Daniel drew Catherine into a tender kiss, the assembled guests broke into applause. Victoria felt tears of joy slip down her cheeks, making no effort to hide them. This moment, this perfect, hard-won moment, had been worth every struggle, every sacrifice. The celebration that followed was as elegant and intimate as the ceremony. A champagne reception in the garden, followed by a seated dinner in the townhouse's renovated dining room that had been expanded to accommodate long tables draped in ivory linen and adorned with spring flowers. Toasts were offered, stories shared, laughter and occasionally tears flowing freely among the gathered friends and family. As the evening progressed, Victoria found herself seeking a moment of quiet, stepping out onto the small balcony off the library. The spring night was cool but pleasant, the garden below illuminated by strings of soft white lights that transformed the space into something magical. "Mind if I join you?" Victoria turned to find Thomas Richardson at the doorway, 2 glasses of champagne in hand. She nodded, accepting one of the glasses as he joined her at the balcony rail. "Beautiful ceremony," Thomas commented, gazing out at the twinkling garden below. "Yes," Victoria agreed. "Simple but meaningful. Just what Catherine wanted." They stood in companionable silence for a moment, an ease between them that would have seemed impossible a year ago. "I received the first progress report on the Maxwell Hartwell Scholarship recipients," Thomas said finally. "Remarkable young people. One of them has already filed a patent application for a new method of detecting financial fraud through algorithm analysis." Victoria smiled. Maxwell would have been fascinated. He always believed technology should serve ethical purposes, not just commercial ones. "The more I learn about him," Thomas admitted, "the more I wish I had known him. He seems to have been an extraordinary man." "He was," Victoria said simply. "Not perfect, by any means, but fundamentally good in a way that's rare in our world." Thomas nodded thoughtfully. "I've been thinking a lot about legacy lately, about what we leave behind." He gestured to the celebration below. "Your legacy is clear. A daughter who embodies your strength and values. A company built on integrity. A foundation helping those harmed by corporate greed." He paused. "My father's legacy is his shame. The people he hurt, the trust he betrayed." Victoria studied the young man beside her, noting the tension in his shoulders, the weight he still carried despite his efforts to make amends. "A legacy isn't just what's given to you, Thomas," she said gently. "It's what you choose to do with it. Your father made his choices. You're making different ones." Thomas turned to face her, his expression earnest. "I've received an offer from a technology ethics consortium in Switzerland. They want me to lead a global initiative on responsible innovation." Victoria raised an eyebrow, surprised but impressed. "That's a significant opportunity." It would mean leaving Boston, Thomas continued, starting fresh somewhere new, where the Richardson name isn't associated with scandal. Is that what you want? Victoria asked. Thomas considered the question carefully. I think it might be. To build something entirely my own, defined by my values rather than my family history. He smiled ruefully. Phoenix Innovations is doing well, but it will always carry the shadow of how it began. Victoria nodded, understanding his desire for a clean slate. Sometimes the bravest thing we can do is begin again, she said. Maxwell would have told you that life is too short for regrets, that we honor the past not by being bound by it, but by learning from it. Wise advice, Thomas acknowledged. He raised his glass slightly. To new beginnings. Victoria touched her glass to his. To new beginnings. As Thomas excused himself to return to the celebration, Victoria remained on the balcony, contemplating their conversation. New beginnings indeed. Catherine embarking on married life with a partner who truly valued her. The foundation growing in influence and impact. And Victoria herself, stepping away from the corporate world to focus on work that spoke directly to her heart. The sound of laughter drew her attention back to the garden, where Catherine and Daniel were dancing, their faces alight with joy as they moved among their friends. Victoria watched them, a profound sense of peace settling over her. This was what Maxwell would have wanted for their daughter. Not wealth or status or power, but genuine happiness. Love, freely given and received. There you are. Victoria turned to find Eleanor in the doorway, a knowing smile on her face. Hiding from the festivities. Just taking a moment, Victoria replied. It's been quite a day. Eleanor joined her at the railing. Catherine's radiant, and Daniel can't take his eyes off her. As it should be. Victoria nodded, satisfaction evident in her voice. Eleanor studied her friend carefully. And you? How are you feeling about all of this? Victoria considered the question, looking out over the garden, the celebration, the new family being formed before her eyes. Grateful, she said finally. After everything we've been through, to arrive at this moment, it feels like a gift I never expected to receive. And the foundation? No regrets about stepping back from Hartwell Enterprises? Victoria shook her head. None. Robert is more than capable, and the company is thriving. She smiled. Besides, working with Catherine at the foundation, it's given me purpose in a way I hadn't anticipated. Using our experience to help others heal from similar betrayals. It feels right. Eleanor nodded, understanding in her eyes. She had been beside Victoria through every step of the journey, from the devastating morning of Maxwell's death to this joyful evening celebrating Catherine's new beginning. Maxwell would be proud, she said softly, of both of you. Yes, Victoria agreed. I think he would. As the evening drew to a close, Catherine and Daniel prepared to depart for their honeymoon. 2 weeks in the Greek islands, far from the demands of work and the lingering media interest in their story. The guests gathered in the garden to bid them farewell, showering them with rose petals as they made their way to the waiting car. Catherine paused before getting in, turning back to embrace Victoria one last time. I love you, Mom, she whispered. I love you too, Victoria replied, holding her daughter close. Be happy, my darling. That's all I've ever wanted for you. Catherine drew back slightly, her eyes shining with emotion. I know, she said softly, and I am, truly. As the car pulled away, guests waving and calling out final good wishes, Victoria felt a presence beside her. Daniel's grandfather, Walter Brooks, a distinguished federal judge who had officiated at Victoria and Maxwell's wedding nearly 30 years ago. Full circle, the elderly man commented, his voice gruff with emotion. I remember when you and Maxwell stood where Catherine and Daniel stand now. Young, in love, full of dreams. Victoria smiled at the memory. We were so young, she agreed. So naive about what lay ahead. Walter nodded sagely. That's the beauty of it, though, isn't it? None of us knows what's coming. The joys or the sorrows. We just promise to face it together. He patted Victoria's hand. "Maxwell would have been pleased with how it all turned out, Victoria. With the woman you've become, the daughter you've raised, the legacy you've built together." As the last guests departed and the cleanup crew began dismantling the tables and chairs, Victoria remained in the garden, savoring the peaceful aftermath of the celebration. The string lights still twinkled overhead, casting a gentle glow over the flowers and greenery. She found herself seated on a small bench beneath a flowering cherry tree, the same spot where, hours earlier, Catherine and Daniel had exchanged their vows. From her pocket, Victoria withdrew a small, aged photograph. Maxwell on their wedding day, his eyes crinkled with laughter as he looked at something beyond the camera's frame. At her, Victoria remembered. He had been looking at her with such love, such certainty. "We did it, Maxwell," she whispered to the night air. "We protected what mattered. We won." The gentle spring breeze stirred the cherry blossoms overhead, sending a shower of pale petals drifting down around her. Victoria closed her eyes, feeling an almost tangible sense of completion, of a circle closing. Richardson would spend the rest of his life in prison, paying for his betrayal. James would serve his sentence, perhaps emerging wiser and more honest. Catherine had found genuine love with a man of integrity and purpose, and Victoria herself had emerged from the long shadow of grief and vengeance into something lighter, more hopeful. At 54, Victoria Hartwell found herself not at the end of a journey, but at the beginning of a new one. The foundation was growing, its work meaningful and necessary. Her relationship with Catherine had deepened through their shared purpose, their mutual respect, and perhaps, just perhaps, there might be room in her life for other kinds of joy, friendships, travel, even love, if she were brave enough to open herself to the possibility. The watch in her pocket ticked steadily, as it had for decades. Forward, always forward. But now, for the first time in 20 years, Victoria felt truly ready to move with it, not driven by the need for justice or vindication, but by curiosity about what might still lie ahead. As she rose from the bench, a single cherry blossom caught in her hair, Victoria made a silent promise to Maxwell, to Catherine, to herself, to honor the past without being imprisoned by it, to embrace whatever came next with the same courage and determination that had carried her through the darkest days. The path ahead was uncharted, the destination unknown. But Victoria Hartwell had never been afraid of the unknown. After all, she had started with nothing once before, scrubbing floors at night while studying during the day, dreaming of a future she could hardly imagine. And look how far she had come. This new beginning? This was just another step on a journey that had already contained more joy and sorrow, triumph and loss than most people experienced in a lifetime. Whatever came next, Victoria would face it with the wisdom she had earned through years of struggle and perseverance. Maxwell's watch ticked steadily in her pocket as Victoria made her way back into the townhouse, closing the garden door behind her. Outside, the cherry blossoms continued to fall in the gentle spring breeze, covering the ground where vows had been exchanged and a new family born from the ashes of betrayal. Life moved forward, as it always did. And finally, after 20 years of looking back, Victoria Hartwell was ready to move with it, toward whatever adventures still awaited, whatever joys remained to be discovered, whatever legacy she would yet create. For all our moments, the promise remained true, even now, especially now.